Let's talk about everyone's favorite weapon type, the arts, in Fire Emblem Engage. So what would I do to rebalance the arts in Engage? So mostly this is going to be balancing around maddening difficulty. I also want to consider what the art actually does or brings to the table. So to begin, let's talk about SCROLLCAKE. So SCROLLCAKE is a joke weapon that's from the well. It's not really meant to be used, so I would just leave it alone. The next weapon we have is the Iron Body art. Now, just like with all iron weapons, it's basically just early game filler that falls off quickly. I would like it to have something to do. I feel like it's kind of dumb that you can even forge iron weapons, considering there's almost never an advantage to doing so. If you forge this thing to +5, it has the same might as a base silver art, which is pretty bad. Because you just waste all these resources to essentially make something you can get for free or for much cheaper. So I do think these could have some kind of rework. I'd like to see iron weapons have something that isn't damage but brings value. That's not just like, you know, lightweight, higher hit. Like that's something, but in this game you need damage to kill, you need might. So if the iron weapons are going to be like utility weapons, maybe they give like a void or something. I think that could be good. Like they innately have like +10 avoid, and then maybe it scales from forging. At least then the iron weapon would maintain some kind of use case. Maybe it gives you some defensive stats like defense and res +2 or something like that, and then forging it increases that. That's what I would do for iron. And then next we have the Initiate art. This is another one that I think just needs like straight up reworked. There's no reason to use this. So one of the big advantages of arts is you can punch something 4 times if you double. So this does not do that. And one of the huge advantages of quadding is you rapidly fill up engage meter. And especially on a Lucina unit that wants to refill bonded shield, you basically want to be quadding. So the fact that this can't do that definitely hurts it. It kind of functions as this like early game thing you can use for like a chapter or two to do like 5 damage randomly. But a lot of these arts classes, like the characters that are typically on them and the classes themselves tend to have lower, not lower speed, but like above average speed, which is usually not fast enough to quad. So we'll get to that in a second once we get to Flashing Fist. But Initiate art doesn't really bring too much to the table. In terms of forges, you can get to 9 base might and a little bit of crit. I think the big use case of Initiate could have been crit. Maybe if it had like some base crit of like 15 and then you can forge it and it gets +15 more total, putting it at base 30. That's what I would do. So then it's like a crit weapon and it doesn't quad. So, you know, you have 2 chances to roll crits. At least it would have some kind of use case. In its current form, it just doesn't feel like it does that much. Next, we have the shielding arts. Now, the shielding art I like because it's not really meant to be used to attack, and it basically is just a defensive tool for the most part. It has low damage compared to the actual damage arts, and it just gives you defense +5, and it's great to slap on a bonded shield unit or a dancer to just make them a little bit tankier if you accidentally misplace them and they get hit. Now, the forge on it's a little weird though, because the forge doesn't seem to be aware of what shielding art wants to do. This, it looks like they meant to put +5 there, but it scales the might and the hits. Forging it is basically not worth it. I would like to see its forges reworked. I guess we'll put it in rework. I would like to see its forges improve defense and maybe res. Like maybe like Forge 1 gives you +1 more defense, Forge 2 +1 res, and so on. And eventually it gets you to like +8 defense, +3 res. I think that'd be interesting. It's not going to break the game. You're not going to be enemy phasing like a god and tanking. It's just like a nice little thing. If you wanted to forge it, if you look at these costs, I still probably wouldn't. But it'd be nice to have like something different that isn't just, you know, pure damage. Throw it on your Dancer, throw it on your Chi Adepts or your Martial Masters, whatever. That's what I would do with that. All right, for Steel Hand. So Steel Hand, just like with all steel weapons, has a little bit of crit. This can quad, unlike the Initiate art, obviously. And for the forges, we're looking at the +5 crit at tier 4 and 5, obviously, and then -2 weight. So this is kind of like a weightless quad weapon that's relatively cheap to forge compared to other options. Obviously, steel is always going to be cheaper than silver to forge. So the crit is nice, the weight is nice. The big issue, though, is Flashing Fists exists, and it's super oppressive. But I would say that this could do with some kind of buff Now, obviously, if we buff the might, it's now a silver weapon. So I'm not really sure what I would do to it, but I would put it in maybe reduce the forge costs or buff the forge stats somewhat. Now, how you would buff them, I'm not really sure. This can also forge into a silver or shielding art. Shielding art, obviously, that's for tanking, and silver is just like a more or less stronger variant of this that has more weight. But it needs some kind of buff. I can't really say what I would do to it, because if we just keep increasing the might, then it's competing with other things. Maybe give it like +3 speed or something, so it acts as like a kind of weak flashing fist or something like that. I think that would be fine. Next we have the silver spirit art. So just like with all silver weapons, this will have pretty expensive costs, and the weight is actually reasonable. It's only 7 for a silver weapon. Most silver weapons tend to be like 11 plus weight. For the actual forges themselves, just like with all silvers, you're looking at pretty crazy costs to forge it at a high rank. Now, unfortunately, this is just completely eclipsed by Flashing Fist, so I'm just going to put this in big buffs. There's really no reason to use this because of Flashing Fist, so I think it does need something. I think both of these need buffed. I'm not sure how or why, but maybe something would be done so that there's a reason to use them, because steel weapons and silver weapons on other weapon categories are usually decent, but in this one, you know, because you're not really that fast, you kind of are wanting that +5 speed from flashing so you can even quad to begin with. So these kind of need some kind of speed or something to like help with doubling or quadding, or maybe even some kind of other benefit. Next we have Flashing Fist art. So Flashing Fist gives you +5 speed, but you do take 5 more damage. Now the trade-off of that is not really that big of a deal. It's generally easy to keep your Flashing Fist users safe, or at the very least you can slap a Micaiah engraving on this thing and you're basically unhittable, especially when using Bonded Shield. But the base stats are actually quite good, and even though the weight is 9, the +5 speed offsets that, and it can be pretty easy to get the weight down through engravings. And usually the units that are going to be running this have around like 5 to 7 build anyways. So for the most part, its weight is not that big of an issue, and you will be much faster on this because of the +5 speed. Now the forging is also crazy because it's very cheap compared to the other options. If we look at the silver and the steel, this thing is basically like a steel in terms of forges, but the stat increase is pretty crazy considering it has a base of 9 might and 80 hit. So then we're looking at 90 base hit and 14 base might at +5, and it's not really that expensive to +5. But generally, you will use something like Lunar Brace with this, and as long as you quad, you will kill. So that is kind of the way to run this. You can engrave it with whatever. The base damage can matter, cannot matter, depends on the build and the use case. But this is such a good thing. Like, it's basically the best art. I don't know that I would nerf it even. I think I'd rather just buff the other arts, because on enemy phase it's not really that good and you do take more damage. It also isn't a 1 to 2 range. That could be something that could be done, like maybe Initiate art can 1 to 2 range. That could be interesting. Maybe like steel, and you know, maybe steel gets a little bit more crits and silver gets a little bit more might or something to compensate. Maybe they get like some stat increases that are different to compensate for flashing being so crazy. But I'd like to see something done with those to compensate, but I wouldn't really nerf it because it's not really overpowered, right? Quadding fast enemies is basically impossible. The speed values of most Flashing Fist users are like 25 to 30, and then you add the +5, so like you're not going to be doubling or, you know, quadding the very fast enemies like the Griffins, the Sword Masters, and things like this. So you're only going to be really quadding things that are like medium speed or slow. And if you can double or quad medium or slow speed things, you can kill them with most classes. Most classes and most units that are good on those classes have higher base speed and good build and can double and quad. So this is really like a player phase only thing. Mostly it's used to reset things like Bonded Shield, or maybe like a Byleth Dance or something like that. Those are its real big use cases, I would say. And you can use it to one round, but there's definitely better things. It's still like basically the best art though. There's no question about that. And then finally, we have the Divine Fist art. Now, I love the stats on this thing. I don't like the weight, though. This thing is just too much of an issue. You need Brody of 5. Brody of 4, I would argue, is the metagame for early meta, because you get a ton of iron and steel by getting Brody of 4. Even though there's only a few maps in Brody, you get like an absurd amount of both of those resources, and those can be converted to silver as needed. But Brodia 5 isn't really super worth it, like unless you really feel like it, and this is not that good of a weapon to justify, you know, putting that much money into Brodia. So the weight is 12. It does not increase your speed either. So you're looking at like serious speed fixing in order to quad in one round with this thing. And generally, most of your damage from arts is not coming from the might of the art itself, but it's usually coming from something like Lunar Brace, which is the easiest way to get an art killing. And usually you slap Lunar Brace on a unit that can quad, like speed +5 and Lunar Brace with Flashing Fist is like the easiest way to get most units, usually like Fram or Alir, to one rounding. Because like it's nice to reset your bonded shield and one round. That's especially if it doesn't cost you like forges or good engravings and things like that. For the forge costs on this thing, just like with all S rank weapons and god weapons or whatever, like the tier 5 weapons, it's very expensive to improve it. It does get +5 might and then +10 crits at +5, but obviously 50 silver. It's not worth it. It's not going to enemy phase. It can't 1-2 range. You know, quadding with it's going to be pretty difficult. It weighs a lot. So it's just not a good weapon at all. It needs big buffs. It needs something to justify dumping, you know. It has nothing, like the other thing too is that it has nothing unique about it. Like at least with lances like Venomous, you have the highest might lance, like Great Lance, so doubling doesn't matter, and it also poisons. Those are two unique things. This has nothing unique about it at all. It's basically just a slightly beefier silver art. There's no stat increases. If this gave you like +3 to all of your stats or something, that would be pretty sick. Like something like that. Because then it makes you tankier, you're faster, you have higher dex, you get everything. Maybe not build, like +3 to all non-build stats, maybe even HP, maybe not. I think that could be interesting, because it's called Divine Fist art, but it doesn't really do anything. Like when I think of Divine, I think of like some kind of boon, some kind of blessing, something to make it a little bit more interesting, give it a little bit more flavor. But here's where I think the scrolls are at. Overall, you know, the joke weapon is fine, leave it alone. Flashing Fist is fine. Steel art, little bit of buffs. Silver art, big buffs for sure, because it's basically not really that good. There's no reason to use it. Flashing Fist just completely eclipses it. Divine Fist definitely needs huge buffs. And then Initiate and Iron could do with a rework or some interesting thing. And then shielding, I don't think shielding is in a bad spot. I think it is. It's still good. Like you usually throw it on your Dancer. Like sometimes I'll throw it on, you know, Seedall and then throw, I don't know, like a Micaiah engraving on it. So then he usually avoid tanks. And then if he doesn't, he might, you know, take reduced damage. We'll take, you know, -5 damage from physical. But usually my Dancer's not getting hit, but it's just like a insurance policy, I guess. Considering DLC, I don't really like DLC in this game, so I don't evaluate it. I know some people play this game with DLC on. I think it completely kills the game's balance. The game already has kind of like dubious balancing because of the power of engage rings and funneling XP and stat boosters into units. So adding more power leveling onto that feels unneeded. So I just don't care for it at all. All right, so that is it for this one. Definitely like and subscribe, and feel free to drop a comment as to what you think about these weapons, what they need. Do they need nerfed, reworked, buffed, and so on? And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.